watching Shalom TV, celebrating Jewish culture.
I'm Mark Golub, and you know, all of us have our own personal heroes, people we've seen in the public persona, and we relate to them in some way because they represent for us things that inspire us, move us, make us more of what we really want to be. My first hero, by the way, was Jackie Robinson when I was a 5 or 6 year old child, and amazing impact on me, and I had the pleasure of knowing him later in life. And he, for me, represented the eternal quest of the Jewish people as well. Tremendous impact. And then Elie Wiesel had a tremendous impact on me personally, and later Menachem Begin had a tremendous impact on me. But the individual who I have watched, admired, and who has had influence on me in more ways than he would ever imagine is the man I again have the great honor and pleasure of sitting with. He is the Felix Frankfurter Professor of Law at Harvard University, where he joined that faculty at the age of 25. He is the author of myriad, hundreds of articles, 27, 8, 9 books, fiction and nonfiction. And most important of all, he has represented with clarity and with conscience the voice of America on many of the most important issues confronting our society. And he is a wonderfully committed, active, and courageous Jew who has championed Jewish causes and the Jewish people here in the United States, worldwide, and especially he has become one of the strongest and most articulate voices defending the interests and the genuinely honest needs of the State of Israel. By now you should know that I am privileged. I mean, it's a wonderful thrill for me once again to sit with Alan Dershowitz, and I can't thank you enough. I know how busy you are. You're the one of the people I say there must be 2 or 3 of you.
Well, look, anybody who wants to talk to me about Jackie Robinson can get me to sit down anytime. You know, when Jackie first came to Brooklyn, I was 9 years old.
And you were living in Brooklyn.
I was living in Brooklyn, and we persuaded our very Orthodox Rabbi Samuel Mirsky from Poland, who thought that baseball was shtus, nonsense. We persuaded him a new person had come to town, and he had a job, and we had to give him a Misha Berach, but we couldn't tell him it was a baseball player, so we made up a Hebrew name for him, Yaakov Ganov Ba Ben, Rabin's son.
Oh, that's terrific.
And
that's terrific.
The rabbi was Misha Berach, you know, the man who's just coming to town for the job. Next time up, he got a double. I tell you, he made believers out of all of us.
But wait, I heard you say he was important to you too.
Absolutely.
Tell me why.
We could do anything. If an African-American man could become the Rookie of the Year, the most valuable player, great number 42, hit 242 one year, and could become, you know, the most important man in baseball, there was no stopping us.
Do you understand, Alan, what I mean? That in some way he resonated with me as a Jew, and I became more sensitive to the plight of what was then the Negro black, now African-American struggle in the United States.
Yeah.
As a Jew, I identified with that.
I think that's right. And I think one of the reasons so many Jews identified in the early days of the Civil Rights Movement is out of guilt for not identifying strongly with the other great human rights struggle of the 20th century, the Jews of the Holocaust. And this was 6 years later. We were a stronger community. We were too young to remember anything but the memories of it. But our parents and grandparents, I think, felt a sense of impotence. They couldn't do anything to save their brothers and sisters. And so when the Black Civil Rights Movement came along, this was something we felt more empowered. We were a stronger community at that point. This was a time of great expanding of the economy, and we could really participate and march with African Americans. This was before anybody felt in any way endangered by affirmative action or quotas. We were their brothers, they were our brothers, and I'll never forget, one of the first pieces of art I ever got in my house was a Ben Shahn drawing of an African-American, of a white hand, a Jewish hand, pulling up a black hand. Oh. And I remember when my son, when he came to be about 12 years old, without saying a word one day, just took the picture and put it on its side, and he said, now's the time for the white hand and the black hand to be together rather than one hand pulling up the other.
Wow. What's your son's name?
Jamin.
Jamin, okay. So let me now turn to some substance here. We are in, at the moment, the presidential primary season, which seems to be going on forever, just forever. And we've been talking to a number of people about whether they feel the person who becomes president of the United States next will in fact influence U.S.-Israeli policy. Or, in fact, is U.S.-Israeli policy so fixed in stone that it almost doesn't matter who becomes the next president? Alan, what's your thoughts?
In the large scale of things, it doesn't so much matter. There will always be support for Israel by any current generation of American political leaders. All of the candidates for president clearly support Israel. I'm not talking about the extremists, Ron Paul and Kucinich, but I am talking about the major candidates. But the details of the policy will change considerably. And when we elect a president, we not only elect him or her, we also elect the constituencies that support them. And what I worry about most are the hard left and the hard right, both of whom hate Israel. The hard left we know about, Move On, Michael Moore, Cindy Sheehan, Noam Chomsky, all those people. They hate Israel. They would love to see it destroyed. But the hard right also, Pat Buchanan, David Duke, the real hard right hates Israel too. Israel benefits from a centrist government, and I'm confident that we'll see a centrist government.
Some people have worried out loud about a Brzezinski or a Tony Lake being advisors to Barack Obama. To what extent does that concern you?
Oh, I would be very worried if Brzezinski had any influence on anybody's foreign policy. Look, he had an influence on Carter's foreign policy, which was a disaster and continues to be a disaster. And Brzezinski believes in the Walton Mearsheimer anti-Semitic screed. So I have nothing but contempt for Brzezinski. He's also not that bright. I don't think he's a particularly able former national security advisor. Tony Lake's very different. Tony Lake's solid down the middle. I would have no fear of a Tony Lake advice to any president, nor would I have any fear of Dennis Ross, who I think any Democratic president will go to. There are others who I am concerned about, and many of us are in the process of trying to persuade whoever the president is or the candidates are to eschew certain advisors and to look to other advisors.
As we sit together today, the four people who are still in the race are John McCain, Mike Huckabee, Barack Obama, and Hillary Clinton. Do you know enough about these as individuals? I'd be happy to hear who you support, but that's not really what I'm asking.
Right.
What I'm asking you is, can you evaluate at all each of those four in terms of what you believe their policy vis-a-vis Israel would be?
Yes, I think I can. I think that we know Hillary Clinton's policies. We know what her husband's policies were. Her husband had a deep, deep love for Israel, which was formed with his minister. Of course, Barack Obama has a very different kind of minister, who we hope he will disassociate himself with, a minister who clearly is virulently anti-Israel and has given an award to an anti-Semite, namely the Reverend Farrakhan. But I know Barack Obama. I remember him when he was at Harvard, and I don't think he has an ounce of anti-Semitism or anti-Israel feelings in him, I hope. So I think both Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama would be supportive of Israel. McCain of all...
And does Brzezinski as an advisor to Barack Obama
Well, he's
bother you?
He's not an advisor to Barack Obama. I've checked that out very, very carefully.
Important for us to hear.
He himself volunteered to meet with Barack Obama over the issue of Iraq. And Barack Obama, through one of his major surrogates, has indicated that he would never take advice from Brzezinski on Israel. So I think he satisfied me that he wouldn't take advice about Israel from Brzezinski. I still worry about his minister, and I think if he's going to be the President of the United States, he has to disassociate himself from any even inference of bigotry, and I think his minister, the Reverend Wright, does convey an inference of bigotry.
But are you saying at the moment you don't think either Democratic candidate would pose serious problems for the State of Israel?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Look, the State of Israel, many of its strongest supporters made a big mistake thinking that intentions are the key. George Bush's intentions were very supportive of Israel, but what he did in action was not supportive of Israel. The war in Iraq, I think, has been a disaster for Israel because it took the focus away from Iran and it increased the amount of Shia terrorism in Iraq. I think that McCain, of all the people running for the Republican nomination, is the least predictable on Israel. We know where Romney stood, very, very strongly supportive of Israel. We knew where Rudy Giuliani stood. But McCain is a little bit of an unpredictable nature on the issue of Israel.
Because?
He likes to be new and creative, and I think he's looking for new proposals. In the end, I think he would be decent for Israel, but I can't be as sure. Huckabee, I think, would be a disaster for Israel because he's one of the few, he's like Jimmy Carter. He is a fundamentalist, born-again evangelical Christian who, like Jimmy Carter, thinks there's no such thing as evil in the world and wants to sing Kumbaya and make friends with everybody. You don't make friends with Hezbollah when it blows up children at Jewish community centers in Argentina. You make war on them, not friendship with them. And we need a president who will be very strong in the fight against terrorism and in the fight against the new threats of genocide to the Jewish people and to others that come from Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, and Hamas, and Iran.
Do you think in general the presidential candidates, and for that matter the people who have sat in the White House of late, truly understand the difference between the Israeli attempt just to be left alone and whatever national aspirations the Palestinians have, the extent to which the extremist groups that we associate with terrorism and who have been, raining down the Qassam rockets on Sderot day after day after day, at times there is an attempt to make a moral equivalency.
I just wrote about that today in a blog
Please.
I sent out. And I critiqued some on the left particularly, but some on the right as well, who create a moral equivalence between whoever assassinated the operational head of Hezbollah, who met an untimely death, untimely because if it had happened years earlier, more lives would have been saved. It's a good thing he was killed. And he's a combatant, a military operational person who is an appropriate target. And any moral equivalence between that and what Hezbollah is threatening, to kill children at prayer, to blow up Jewish community centers, and to kill people randomly, it's absurd to think of that they should even be said in the same breath. But for some, it's a cycle of violence, there's a moral equivalence, and it's total nonsense. For Jimmy Carter, it's not even a moral equivalence. Israel is worse than the terrorists. Israel is worse than apartheid South Africa. Israel is worse than Rwanda. I mean, Jimmy Carter has literally become such an anti-Israel bigot that there's a kind of special place in hell reserved for somebody like that. He has no sympathy or understanding for the suffering of the Jewish people, the plight of the Jewish people. He loves every Muslim extremist he can find. He thought the former president of Syria, Assad, was a wonderful man. He bounced Yasser Arafat's children on his knee and loved Yasser Arafat and his crooked wife who stole $3 billion from the Palestinian people. But he never had a kind word to say about almost any Israeli, except a few on the hard left who tended maybe to agree with him. Not a kind word to say about Menachem Begin, one of your heroes. Not a kind word to say about even people who were universally admired, Prime Minister Rabin. If you're an Israeli, Carter doesn't like you. And if you're an Arab or a Muslim, he likes you.
To what extent do you feel that the people who are now running for the White House really understand that it's not a moral equivalency?
I think they do. I think there are some in the past who haven't. I think George Bush Sr. didn't have a full and good understanding of that. I think his Secretary of State Baker did not have a good understanding of that. I think George Bush, the president, now does, though I disagree with his policies. I can't find any fault with what's in his heart. And I think all of the leading presidential candidates understand there's no moral equivalence. I can't imagine a McCain who was a victim of unlawfulness and torture would not see a distinction between those who held him captive and the American soldiers, or between Israel's efforts to protect its citizens from rocket attacks and those who inflict the rocket attacks. So I'm fairly confident that they see the distinction. Now, there's a difference between seeing it and feeling it. And I'm hoping that in addition to seeing it, they also feel it in their heart the way President Clinton did.
Okay, I was very anxious to have you here to ask you the next question. Because again, you represent a commitment to both the American scene and the Jewish scene. So in the last 2 weeks, we've had the chance to speak to a Ronald Lauder and a Leonard Fine. Ronald Lauder says to us, from his perspective, when an American Jew goes into the polling booth, the most important issue that should be on that American Jew's mind is the state of Israel. Leonard Fine says that when a Jew goes to vote, the most important thing that should be on his mind is who would make the best president for the United States of America, and ipso facto, that will be the best president for Israel. May I ask how you come out on this issue? And again, I don't want to, I'm not asking a simple question.
No, it's a very complicated question.
Okay.
I understand it.
Where do you come out?
Well, I don't have to make that decision, fortunately, because I think that, at least as of the moment, I may have to make it in 4 years or 8 years or 12 years, but I don't have to make it now. Right now, I have the luxury of being able to vote for a president who will support my views of social justice, who will support my views of tikkun olam, my views of what makes America great, knowing that all of them will be good for Israel. And I never want to see a situation where a vote for the president is a referendum on Israel. That happened in Germany, and the right candidate won. That happened in France, and the right candidate won. That could happen in England in a coming election. It hasn't happened in the United States. We have the luxury as American Jews of voting for the best president, and that's why the Jewish vote's always split, because we don't vote on the basis just of Israel or just of Jewish issues. We vote as Americans first. And as an American, I want to see the United States strongly support Israel.
I want to tell you, though, the way I hear the argument framed, just to give you one more chance to help us understand. There are those who say that there could be a president who reflects in terms of his social policies and even his idea of how the United States should present itself internationally as one who they would feel very comfortable with in terms of health care and helping the underclass to rise and to deal with issues of the economy and to appoint Supreme Court justices who would be representing their vision of what justice would be in this country. And representing the United States and be against the war in Iraq. But that individual might be one who would pressure Israel out of a real conviction in their own heart that the Palestinian community has been in some way disadvantaged because of Israeli occupation or Israeli intransigence, whatever it is, as opposed to a presidential candidate who might not have the same social policies, who might appoint very different kinds of justices.
I understand the question.
And at the same time be absolutely adamant that whatever Israel does is right. In that instance, Alan.
I don't want a president, by the way, who thinks that whatever Israel does is right. That's not in Israel's interests. I don't want Pat Robertson to be my president. Pat Robertson thinks everything Israel does is right, except when it withdraws from territory. He
but
said,
you know what I'm saying.
I know what you're saying, and I'm hoping, you know, I'm 69 years old, I'm hoping that for the rest of my life I never confront that hypothetical situation, because I can't vote for a president who would appoint justices of the Supreme Court who don't support gay rights and women's rights to Jews. I can't do that. And I can't vote for a president of the United States who wouldn't support Israel. So far, I've never had to make that choice. And if I had to make that choice, there would be some great structural problem with America that I would be spending my time fighting. I would be trying to prevent the nomination of any president who presented us with that choice.
Okay, but you seem to be saying therefore, that in terms of whether it's a Republican or a Democrat, whether it's a conservative Republican or a liberal Democrat, you would expect that in overall, their policy vis-a-vis Israel would be so close to each other that would not bother you.
We can make it into a non-hypothetical. Let's assume Jimmy Carter were running today. I support a lot of Jimmy Carter's domestic policies, but he has views toward Israel. I could not vote for Jimmy Carter. Let's be very clear. I could not vote for Jimmy Carter. First of all, I think he'd make a terrible president. I think he made a terrible president. He set back the economy. He was a weak president. He handled our crisis with Iran terribly. So I could not vote for Jimmy Carter. Could I vote for his opponent? That would be a very, very hard question. I don't like third-party candidacies either. I would be very distressed if my choices were between Jimmy Carter on the one hand and Pat Robertson on the other, or Governor Huckabee on the other. I would not feel that this was the country I loved and devoted so much of my time to supporting. I'm hoping that at least for my lifetime and the lifetime of my children and grandchildren, we won't have that terrible choice.
Okay. Talk now about one other wrinkle that has emerged in this long, long primary campaign. It seems to me, Alan, that there has been more injection of religion and faith into the presidential discussions than I can remember in a long time.
And it's appalling.
Would you speak to your feelings about that?
It is absolutely appalling. And the Democrats are as bad as the Republicans. They had a debate one night where each of them described in detail how important Jesus was in their life. You know what? Thomas Jefferson would be turning over in his grave. Thomas Jefferson was personally a religious man. He believed in God, but he never would allow his religion to be in any way part of his public life. He regarded religion as private. And I have to tell you that the one Democrat I was somewhat proud of, I wish he had stopped when I was proud of her, was Hillary Clinton when she said, you know, me as a Methodist, we don't wear our religion on our sleeves. I can only tell you that my faith did help me during times of crisis. I don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear that. I want to hear what your policies are. I think Barack Obama has way, way, way overdone religion. I think he's trying to overcome the false notion that he has some sympathy with Islam, and therefore he is more Christian than the Christians. And, you know, I love what Romney said when he was running. He said, in America, anybody can run for president. We don't care about their religious views as long as they accept Jesus as their personal savior. So you can be a Mormon, a Catholic, a Protestant. I mean, what absurd bigotry. You know, there was a period of time in America, in South Carolina, when a Jew was elected to the state legislature and he wouldn't take the oath on the New Testament, and they refused to seat him. And he brought a lawsuit. And he said, if today you distinguish between Christian and Jew, tomorrow you'll start distinguishing among Protestants, and you'll have to take the oath on a particular Bible that represents the theology of a particular sect. That's not the America we have come to love. And they allowed him to sit.
What's your sense? Why did it happen?
Well, it's all just political opportunism. I mean, I can tell you, I know some presidential candidates, we're not going to get into who they are, who wouldn't be able to find a church if you asked them what the address was between the election years, and suddenly election time, oh, they're just so religious. Americans have this false belief that to be moral you have to be religious, and that you have to be religious in a certain way. It started with Jefferson. When he ran against Adams in 1800, the campaign slogan was Adams and God or Jefferson without God. And Jefferson won. Today, Jefferson couldn't get elected dog catcher. And Lincoln couldn't get elected dog catcher. Lincoln is the only president in American history who would not identify himself as a Christian. He refused to say what particular sect he belonged to or what particular religious affiliation he had or what church he belonged to. He said nice things about Jesus, but he would refuse to identify himself as religious in the traditional way. But today, you can't get elected. Even the first Jew to be nominated for vice president made a terrible statement. He agreed that you can't be moral without being religious. He knows better than that. And I think our candidates, Joe Lieberman, who I know and I like and who's a friend, but I wish he hadn't said that.
There's a lot of God talk in his campaign.
A lot of God talk in this campaign. People think they're running not for commander-in-chief, but for the preserver of the faith. You know, they're running for Queen of England. Queen of England is officially the defender of the faith. In America, our chief executive is not defender of the faith. It's protector of the Constitution. And the Constitution mentions religion only 3 times. 1, no religious test shall ever be required. 2, no religion shall be established. And 3, you can practice your religion freely, all of which make America great.
You've talked before about the separation of church and state and how important it's been for the Jewish
For the Jews.
community.
And nothing can be more important.
Yeah, and I don't want to see that eroded.
I don't either, but there are a lot of Jews who do.
Yes, Alan.
A lot of my friends who I grew up with, Orthodox Jews, remember, what happens is when the government starts giving out money, it has a big influence. When I was growing up, Orthodox Jews didn't get any money from the government. Today, faith-based initiatives, 98% of them are Christian, but some money has trickled down to the Jewish community, and some within the Orthodox community, particularly the Haredi community, see dollar bills. And they're prepared to give up our first-class citizenship. Remember, we're only first class as Jews because there are no classes when it comes to religion. If there are classes, we wouldn't be second class. This is not a Judeo-Christian country. If it is an anything Christian country, it's soon going to be a Muslim Christian country, like all of Europe is going to be, and we're not going to be second class, we're going to be third class. So the only choice is third or fourth class on the one hand, or first class. Who wouldn't choose first class? Our Constitution assures us first class status. George Washington famously wrote to the rabbi saying of toleration, we will speak no longer in this country. All Americans are equal as long as they serve their nation.
So you hope that the American Jewish community understands how important church-state separation is, even if it means giving up dollars.
It means giving
even
up
if it means
dollars.
not having subsidies for day schools, for example.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm today appalled at some of the Orthodox Jewish organizations having such a short-sighted view of the history of the separation of church and state. And I would hope they would see the bigger picture.
This comes out of sequence, but it's so important to me to hear you talk about this that I want to do it now. You already alluded to your age.
Mm-hmm.
I've already alluded to how important you've been as a figure in my life, not alone the chance you've given me on a number of occasions to sit with you. You have been, in my mind, a champion of a liberal perspective.
Mm-hmm.
To what extent do you feel you are any less committed to the liberal principles you had when you were 30, 40, 50 years old than you do now as you're in your 60s?
More committed to liberal principles.
Describe that for me.
I am a liberal, and I will always be a liberal, but I am an anti-radical. And people misunderstand what it means to be a liberal. I'm not on the far left. I spend most of my time fighting the far left. My greatest enemies in the world are Jewish leftists, the Noam Chomskys, the Norman Finkelsteins, the Tony Judds, the Tony Kirchners, the people who claim the mantle of Judaism and claim that to be a Jew you have to be a Trotskyite or a revolutionary. So I fight very hard as a liberal against the hard Stalinist left. But that
and
fight...
forgive me, define one more moment for me.
Sure.
The difference between a liberal, as you understand it, and the liberal left.
It's not a liberal left. It's the radical left.
The
There's
radical,
nothing
okay.
liberal about the radical left. They want speech codes. They want to censor people. They have no tolerance for different points of view. They are everything opposed. They're much closer to fascists than they are to liberals. To me, a liberal is much closer to a centrist conservative. I mean, I really do get along very well with lots of centrist conservatives because we love liberty. We don't want the government in our bedrooms. We don't want the government in our medicine cabinets. We don't want the government checking up on everything we do. We don't want the government in our churches and synagogues. And that's true of centrist conservatives and centrist liberals.
And what's the difference between a centrist conservative and you as a liberal?
The difference is progressive taxation, gay rights, a woman's right to choose abortion, things that reasonable people can disagree upon, but I've taken a position. I would say redistribution.
Are there principles
Yes.
that undergird your philosophy that are different from the principles of a conservative?
Yes. Yes.
What are they?
I think redistribution of income. That is a much fairer system of taxation, higher taxes on the wealthy, higher taxes on inheritance, a floor, higher minimum wages, the free public education. I'm a big supporter. I went to Brooklyn College. I would not be sitting in this chair today if America didn't have free college education in the city of New York. My family couldn't afford to send me to Columbia. I didn't even have the grades to get into Columbia either, but I had to go to a free New York City college. And I'm so hurt that this next generation of immigrant kids who come from Syria or Russia or other parts of the world don't have the benefit of a free college education that I had. And so that I'll always be a liberal. And, you know, I get letters all the time from my pro-Israel friends on the right, join the conservative movement. I actually am thinking about writing a book, why I left the left, really the hard left, but couldn't join the right. I could never join the right. I will always remain a centrist leftist. You know, within that parameter, some of my views may have changed over the years, but not many.
Okay. So I ask you if you're now as liberal as you were.
Yes.
You say, if not more so.
Right, right.
How does that relate to your positions on Israel? And have you seen any arc in your own positions? Or have you been as a staunch supporter and defender of Israel's rights as long as you can remember?
I went to Camp Masad, which was a Zionist Hebrew-speaking camp in the Poconos. The counselor in the next bunk was Noam Chomsky, who was a member of Hashomer Hatzair. And I
What
grew
an
up,
interesting life you've
right.
had.
I grew up in a family of Mizrahi Zionists, religious Zionists. Our big complaint was David Ben-Gurion wasn't religious. I've changed my views on that. But I actually am a much more fervent supporter of Israel today than I was 30 or 40 years ago, only because Israel is under far more attack today. I see
Yes,
Israel...
would you say that again? Because it's a very important point. The reason you are now more involved is because
Israel is far more under attack today from particularly the hard left and the hard right. And I always defend the underdog. And I see Israel as a great human rights issue. In fact, when I speak on university campuses, I say one of the greatest human rights issues of the 21st century is whether Israel's willingness to defend itself and defend its citizens from terrorism will become yet the latest excuse in a many-century-long series of excuses for anti-Semitism. And I think that's what's happening. I think during the Holocaust, people didn't care about Jews. As soon as Jews got guns, that's all the people cared about. If you look at the UN, all their condemnations are against the Jewish state. If you look at Europe, they think, many people think Israel is the worst human rights offender. What I challenge my audiences, and I've never gotten a rebuttal to this, no matter where I am, at Irvine, California, Columbia University, Ohio State, I turn to the hostile audience of 1,000 people and I say, name one country in the world, anywhere, faced with comparable threats to its existence, internal and external, that has ever had a higher standard of compliance with the rule of law or with human rights. Nobody has ever shouted out a country because they know if they do, I will be able to disprove that. Does that mean Israel's perfect on human rights? No, I think it gets a B-. But in a world where everybody else gets C-, D-, some maybe C+, like the United States of America, to single out Israel as the worst when it is the best shows something about those who are singling it out rather than Israel.
on your website, the issue that is most prominently displayed right now is the issue of anti-Semitism. Speak for a moment, and you've just said that you really believe in some way the anti-Zionist movement is really an anti-Semitic movement.
In some respects.
In some respects,
very
okay.
careful about how I use the term anti-Semitic.
Okay.
I only use it against people who I think really, in one of my books I list 15 criteria
Yes.
for distinguishing legitimate criticism of Israel from illegitimate criticism and then from anti-Semitism. And it's a line that I want to see crossed
Okay, I don't
clearly
need
before
15.
I accuse.
Give me one or two of the issues you think distinguishes what you would say that's a legitimate issue, whether I agree or
Right.
not, it's legitimate, as opposed to it being anti-Semitic.
The single most important issue is when you single out the Jewish state for unique criticism that you don't apply to any other nation. That has to be motivated by a hatred of the Jewish state, the Jew among states. When you accuse Israel of Nazi tactics, never accuse Israel of being like Pinochet or of even being like Mussolini or Stalin. It's always being like the Gestapo, which Norman Finkelstein accuses it of being, or Nazi-like, or apartheid-like. Those kinds of charges can't be made without a deep hatred of things Jewish in your soul.
Did you see the flap at Ms. Magazine?
I did.
Where they refused to take an
It's
ad?
despicable. I was an original
Oh, wait,
subscriber to Ms.
Just let our audience know what it is.
Ms. Magazine, who I subscribe to, I helped some of the people who founded
Of course.
the earliest days of the feminist movement, a big supporter of Ms. Magazine, was asked to print a simple ad showing 3 pictures. The photograph of the Chief Justice of Israel, a good friend of mine, Dorit Banish, the Foreign Minister of Israel, Tzipi Livni, who was also the Deputy Prime Minister, and a third woman who's like the Nancy Pelosi of Israel, the Speaker of the Knesset. 3 of the dominant positions in Israel. They should have had a 4th picture, Golda Meir, the only woman in modern history, the first woman in modern history ever to be elected Prime Minister without having a husband or a father or a brother who was previously.
And the point of the ad was supposed to be?
Simply, this too is Israel. It shows that Israel supports women's rights. Ms. Magazine wouldn't take it. They said it would cause a firestorm among our readers. In other words, saying anything positive about Israel would cause a firestorm among feminist readers of Ms. Magazine. Well, my subscription no longer exists, and I urge others not to subscribe to Ms. Magazine until they change that policy.
You have been very concerned about the issue of terrorism. My question simply is, what bothers you most, and what do you feel in general the Jewish community, and for that matter the American community, is missing? What's the point we're missing?
I think the point that we're all missing is that terrorism trivializes human life, that we're dealing with a culture which, this is not me speaking, this is leading Islamic zealots saying, they say, we will beat you, Israel, because you love life and we love death. This culture of death literally threatens the entire world.
Do they say they love death?
Yes. Oh yeah, it's quoted in 2 of my books, Preemption and Why Terrorism Works. I have direct quotes from Islamic leaders. Tom Friedman quoted it as well. We love death. Just today, as we're speaking today, I read a woman at the rally the other day for the killed Hezbollah leader saying to her son, if you do not become a suicide bomber and die killing Jews, I don't want you. Can you imagine a mother telling her son to die in order to kill Jews? This love of death, this willingness to die. One of the reasons I was opposed to the Iraq War is I'd much prefer to have an enemy who fears death, like Saddam Hussein, than an enemy who welcomes death, like some of the Islamic extremists. This is not a new thing with us. Thomas Jefferson, back in the last decade of the 18th century, went to speak to the ambassador from the Barbary coast and said, you can't be kidnapping our sailors and chopping their heads off and enslaving the women and the children. And he said, yes, we can. And Jefferson said, we'll call out the Navy. And the ambassador said, it doesn't matter. We welcome death. If you kill us, we will be shaheeds. We will be martyrs. Nothing's changed except for the 72 virgins. And this idea of welcoming death and rewarding it in such an incredibly sexist fashion, you're going to get 72 young women to have sex with if you kill Jews. I mean, this culture of death, this culture of violence, this hatred of life is so frightening to all people in the world because it could lead to the kind of nuclear attack on the world which could destroy it. It could destroy civilization.
You hear it at Harvard. I know you hear it wherever you go. There are many American Jews who consider themselves liberal.
I do.
Yes,
I'm a liberal.
Yes, I know.
Okay.
Who feel that in some way, the quote, the West has used its resources, its wealth, its power in such an unfair way that other peoples of the earth have been, again, subjugated in one form or another. And that the reason there is so much anger in the Islamic world at the West is, in fact, the West's fault. And that part of the problem is we must change ourselves. What would you say to them?
First of all,
you've heard this.
Of course. That's not what Islamic fundamentalists want. They want us to become Muslims, and they want us to reject Christianity and Judaism and secularism. And they want us to become them under their domination. Second, there are no people in the world more charitable than Americans, and within America, no people more charitable than American Jews. And we give whenever there is a crisis, anywhere in the world. We give when Muslims are victims of a tsunami. The idea that the West is always at fault. Look, I have my criticisms of the West, believe me. Environmental pollution, global warming, lots and lots of things. Colonialism when it was practiced But Israel's not part of that. Israel is in a colonialist regime. Who are they a colonialist regime on behalf of? Poland? Lithuania? What did they come to capture Palestine on behalf of Poland? Great, they're carrying the Polish flag. They hated Poland. They came to help the Arab people clear the swamps and build orange groves that both could benefit from. The idea of Israel being called colonialist is absurd. The West has its faults. But believe me, people vote with their feet. Has anybody ever heard of anybody wanting to leave America and emigrate to Syria or to Iran? Where do people want to emigrate to? To the United States. And it's not only because of our great wealth, it's because we're a land of opportunity. Why haven't we had Islamic terrorism homegrown in this country? Because the way in which we've treated our Islamic immigrant population has been wonderful. And the vast majority of Muslims in this country are loyal Americans who hate terrorism and hate extremism. I've been in Dearborn, Michigan. I've seen an Islamic community that looks like the Jewish community I grew up in, with American flags, with support for America. So you can say a lot of bad things about any country, but on balance, most people in the world would rather be Americans. And let me tell you something else. Most Arabs in the world, given a choice to live in Israel, would much rather live in Israel. You know what happened when the fence was open in Gaza and the Gaza people went to Egypt? They came back and they said, oh my God, life's much better in Gaza under the former occupation, than it is in Rafah. In Rafah, people make 1/10 of what they make per hour in Gaza. The roads aren't paved. There's no air conditioning. There's no electricity. So let's put things in perspective and proportion. Let's be critical of America, critical of Israel, but let's keep criticism in proportion. Those are both great, great countries.
Last question for you. When we met a while back, you had just written Chutzpah. And we had this wonderful conversation where you permitted me to sort of ask you what your feelings were personally about your own Jewish life and then the Jewish community as a whole.
Right.
Then you wrote The Vanishing American Jew. So before I'm done with you, take one moment as you look at the American Jewish landscape today, Alan. First of all, would you write the same book? Vanishing American Jew was written in 1997. So this is 10 years later, 11 years later.
Right.
So would you write the book the same way today? And as you look at the landscape, even out of your own personal experience, what is your feeling about where we stand as an American Jewish community?
Well, first of all, I'd never write the same book because every book of mine should be done either as an iBook or in loose leaf form because things change so fast.
Good for you.
There's a lot I would keep the same. I think that the Tsurist theory of Jewish survival still operates. That is, Jews stick together mostly when they're in trouble. And when there's no trouble, we've never had that experience, Jews tend to assimilate.
But American Jews sort of have that now, don't they?
Domestically, but not internationally. There's no anti-Semitism in America from the top down. Nobody tells us where to live, where to go to school, where to work. That's all gone. That was, I got turned down from 32 out of 32 Wall Street firms when I was first in my class and applying to Wall Street firms. That doesn't happen today. But anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism in Europe is worse than it's been in many, many, many years and more virulent and more dangerous. So I changed that part of the book clearly. What I worry mostly about with the Jewish community today is the development of extremes. I think the Orthodox community today is not what it was when I was growing up. The dominant Orthodox community when I was growing up was modern Orthodox. We played baseball and basketball, we put our yarmulkes in our pockets, we ate kosher food, but we were all American kids. You couldn't tell us apart. Today, more and more of my friends' children and grandchildren have become Haredim, and then more have become secular. So that middle area, as I said, I don't like generally extremes. I don't like them in politics. I don't like them in religion. So I think the future is going to be a large, very conservative Jewish community and a large community of people of Jewish heritage, people who have a Jewish parent, a Jewish grandparent, who identify with their Jewishness in some way but aren't halachically Jewish and don't practice the religion in the way that our parents and grandparents practiced it.
Well, at a subsequent meeting, we'll spend more time with that. I love it when you talk about this, and I'd love to hear you talk with other people about it. But, in addition to everything else you do, is it true what I read that you're now writing an opera?
I am.
You're
Yes.
writing an opera. How did that happen?
Based on Chazanut. I grew up as a choir boy in Moshe Kusevitsky's choir. I used to do it better. And I love Chazanish music. And so I decided to write the first opera based on liturgical themes,
You're
cantorial
amazing.
music.
So
And-
where does it stand?
Well, I have a lot of the libretto written. I am tomorrow meeting with one of the great composers to see where we're going musically. When I leave here tonight, I'm going to Park East Synagogue to listen to Chazan Helfgott. I'm a groupie. Every time he davens, I go to listen to him. He's the greatest living cantor in the world today, I think. Really follows in the footsteps of Moshe and David Kusevitsky. So I love cantorial
Well,
music.
I
Both
wish
of my
you so well.
grandfathers were Chazanim.
Oh my goodness!
Right?
I am so happy for you. You know, your creativity never ceases to amaze me. I wish you all the best.
Thank you.
I can't thank you enough for spending more time, and you know I'm going to chase you all the time.
What a pleasure to talk to you.
But Alan Dershowitz,
Good.
Kol Tuva Hatzlacha.
You too.
You're a
Thank
very
you.
special man.
You are
Thank
too.
you for the time.
Thank you very well.
Alan Dershowitz. We hope you enjoyed hearing him. Of course, as always, I invite you to be in touch with us with any thoughts or comments you might have to the things Alan Dershowitz said. Write me this week at Rabbi Golub at shalomtv.com or at Post Office Box 1989, Fort Lee, New Jersey 07024. I'm Mark Golub. Thank you for being with us. Be well, my friends.
We'd love to know your response to this Shalom TV program. Please be in touch with us to share your thoughts and comments. You may do so by visiting our website at www.shalomtv.com or by writing us at Post Office Box 1989, Fort Lee, New Jersey 07024. I'm David Sharaga. Thank you for watching Shalom TV.